Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Need to Know About Ransomware. This is a really important topic. So we are so excited to have Kate Riley and Andrew Goncalves from Braintrace here to present. So take it away whenever you're ready, Kate. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much. So let me just do a brief introduction to myself. I am Kate Riley, and I'm the Director of Information Security and Compliance at Braintrace. And Braintrace is a managed security service provider, and it's one of the components of ransomware when we look at how we're monitoring our security and the threats to it. And ransomware is a topic that is just emerging, and we've seen a lot of growth in ransomware as a process for the bad actors to get money. So today we're going to walk through that and how it affects your own business and of course your clients too, because in the legal industry you could be on either side or both of that argument. So today I said, let's look at what is it like to get hit by ransomware. Let's see what that feels like for a moment. That will drive us into the psychology of ransomware and a little bit about why it's so successful. And then we're going to segue from that into the actual technology of it, not too techy, but how is it working and why is it so effective? And then we're going to talk a lot today about the controls, some preventive, corrective, and of course then the cybersecurity assurance of the world, because they all kind of interface together and help us understand how to really defend ourselves or our clients against ransomware. Because I'm building up this kind of profile, it'll be best if you save questions until the end or just put them in the chat as we go along. And that way, if I haven't eventually touched on that topic, you can ask that question in the chat, and then Andrew will kind of monitor the chat for us and then bring those questions up at the end of our presentation. This should take about 40 minutes or so to walk through, so there should be plenty of time in the end to answer questions or just revisit any topics that you felt you had a few more questions on it. So let's get started. So what is it like when you get hit by ransomware? I think the first thing is you have absolutely no warning. You are just bit. And what is it to mean that you have ransomware? It means that you are locked out of your computer or your database or your server or your website. In a lot of cases, it's just an immediate impact to your business operations because the whole point of ransomware is to disrupt your business and either make it so you can't get access to the data that you need or the systems that you need, or to encrypt that data and hold it, if you will, ransom. And there are two types of ransoms in here. You can have it just locking you out or encrypt the database. And in encrypting your data or database or your laptop or your server, what it's doing is it can just encrypt it and send that screen that you see on here that's really scary. All your files are locked or encrypted, or it might actually, before it sends that message, take a copy of that encrypted data and ship it back to the mothership, if you will, and hold it hostage outside of your network. So ransomware can go in a lot of different directions. Now, one of the things that people forget about ransomware is you're locked out. Imagine opening your computer today, turning it on, and you can't get into your computer. All you see is this red screen. Then you can't look up your phone numbers. You can't send an email out to your help desk. You're not even sure, what's on your schedule today that could be impacted. And we like to think, oh, I could bypass that by using my mobile device, my phone, because I got my email on my phone and I can get to things and I can get out there. But depending on the kind of ransomware, it's encrypted your email software. It's encrypted your email server. It might have encrypted your interface to email. So your mobile device can't get to it either because it's all in that internal network that is affected. And so you realize really quickly that ransomware has kind of stopped you, all of your employees, and potentially your customers in their tracks. And the other thing about ransomware is it's got a clock ticking. I mean, the whole point of this is to create this pressure cooker because it wants you to have an emotional reaction and to react in, if you will, through a scare tactic. And that fear thing there is that if you don't pay in 48 hours, it's doubled. And if you don't pay in 24 hours, it's doubled. And then you have like 96 hours and then they just destroy your files. And that's the scary part about ransomware, is that it's not that you couldn't recover from ransomware, it's that it's obviously figured out you can't recover all of your files and decrypt it in 24 hours because you have to figure out what's encrypted. You have to go through the back door. You have to look through a lot of stuff. It takes longer than 24 and 48 hours to actually solve that problem. And they know that. And it's not even solvable, if you will, in 100 hours. And think about it. That's not your business day. That's consecutive hours. So this pressure cooker is on, you're blocked out, you have deadlines, you don't know what to do. Ransomware is designed to scare you, and it does a very good job at it. So let's walk into the psychology of it about why ransomware is actually such a good technique for these bad actors, and it's very lucrative for them. So in my experience in dealing with ransomware, it comes down to two questions that you have to answer as soon as you're bit. One is, do I have to pay? And the other is, can I afford to pay? Now that do I have to pay starts this, again, a second kind of internal pressure cooker because it's IT that's being asked, can we stop this? Can we solve it? Can we recover? You know, do we have to pay? And your IT people are looking at it from a technical problem to solve. And of course, that's going to take them some time to answer that question. They have to do the investigation. They have to figure out, you know, is it the whole network? Is it just a couple end clients? What is actually encrypted? And they may not have resources to help them do that. So it's a process in answering this question. And then it comes into other people, all those employees, those important attorneys that have documents and deadlines and possibly client meetings that are waiting and waiting and waiting. And so they're going to be putting in a lot of, you know, when are we back up? When can I get back up? I have a dependency on the data on my local laptop. I have a dependency to get to this information. And of course, your managing partner and all sorts of other stakeholders, legal, inside your internal legal counsel, as well as your HR personnel, and you might also have customers that are clamoring here. And so you get this secondary pressure cooker. Can we resolve this quickly? Can we resolve this quietly? Can we just get back up? Can we just say we have a technical issue? And you start to realize, again, within 24 hours, right, that this conversation is starting to get a reality. Like, we just don't actually have our backups offline. We can't just restore from a backup copy. We're going to lose the current data. Or you've got certain individuals that come forward and say, you know what, I saved local. I didn't save it to like a database that is backed up. And if I lose that data, it's a huge impact, either in terms of data that you can't reperform, or maybe data that once it's lost, it's a bigger impact. So you realize, again, do I have to pay comes back to dependency, and you need that data. And of course, all those other stakeholders clamoring at the same time. Imagine how you're going to sort out who answers that question in your organization, because it's IT that's giving some information, but it's not necessarily IT departments, you know, to say, oh yeah, let's pay, and then we'll hopefully get our systems back and we'll be fine. So it's a more, yeah, psychology is we're out of time. And so if you're not prepared on the strategies to deal with a business interruption at this scale, that question of do I have to pay becomes incredibly stressful to figure out. But the second question is, can I afford to pay? And that becomes even more complex, because whether or not that ransom is, you know, a reasonable number or not, it could be greater than your cash liquidity at that time, right? You have to buy a Bitcoin, so, or coins in some cases, right? And you may or may not have cyber security insurance, and if you do, it may not cover the ransomware, or it may not cover all of the costs involved in managing your incident. And we'll cover that actually as the last part of this presentation, about how cyber insurance isn't necessarily a resolution. And one of the reasons for that is that you sort of pay first and get reimbursed by your cyber insurance. And so paying the ransom in some cases could take up all your liquid cash and impact your ability to stay in business until you are reimbursed. Not to mention all the other kinds of impacts of being offline, not just for 24 hours. It can take up to 2 weeks to recover from a ransomware impact. So it really works. Psychologically, you are like dead in the water, and it's going to take, as you start to realize, wow, 3 to 5 days to figure this out, whether we pay or not. And then we're not going to be up online for a week or more, and we're going to have a lot of money spent. Either way, right? Either you pay the ransom or you figure out and recover separately. It's going to be a huge impact on your organization. So it works as a scare tactic, and it works because it's taken you offline, and you have to spend time answering these two questions. So let's talk a little bit about how ransomware even can happen. And it's really important to realize that that security awareness training that everybody does every year, and it says, you know, don't click, don't do those, don't fall for the phishing email. It is the primary way that ransomware is introduced into an environment. It's a click response kind of phish. But email isn't the only channel that you could get that. It's kind of anywhere that you can click, like in a chat window, like here's an image or a link, click here. It can be on your social media, and also can be any browser that you visit, which is really hard to realize. How do you prevent somebody from clicking on things? And that's where we talk sometime in our kind of, you know, preventive controls, how we can help reduce the likelihood of clicking on something that has a malicious, what we call a payload, which is downloading something into your local laptop. And as you can imagine, it's really not your server or your database that's clicking, it's a person. And that's the other thing, is that we forget that all of the responses we get to questions in our Google query is responding to the answers to that question. Those are bots that are saying, those are ad identifiers. So when you ask for something very obscure and you get a return on those results, you're like, oh, that's great, that's what I wanted, click. And then you get to that website, and of course, that's the design of, you know, the browser return searches is all designed to kind of get you. So it can be really easy to fall into a ransomware snare, and it can be, as you saw, really difficult to get out of it. But what is happening when you click on that? It's called like a Trojan horse. It's downloading a script to your local end client, or because you are online on a browser, it starts to scan your network because you are configured to the your own network on your browser, and so it starts to follow the trail. And so it's this bot kind of software that has a script, and it has instructions in its script about what it's going to do on your network. Now, the point of ransomware is to take you offline and disrupt your business, and it can be anything from just that local client that you're on, just encrypt that laptop because that's job done, or it can start scanning for specific kinds of data on your network and looking for servers as well. And one of the functionalities of ransomware is that it looks and scans your local laptop first. It doesn't have to encrypt immediately. A lot of times ransomware wants to get you when you first log on in the morning rather than during business, because it wants time to learn what's on your network and then create what we call plants the additional seeds along your network, so that it can start to really disrupt you in a way that forces you to say, wow, I'm dead in the water, so I better pay this ransom. And so it can look for a database, and then it'll run a query on the database and get responses to the query that tell it whether or not there's social security numbers or financial numbers, or perhaps customer information on there. Depends on whatever that bot's looking for. And there's really two kinds of ransomware, as we talked about. One can just lock you out, right? It just changes your bias, changes the admin on your local, and then boom, all you have is this screen of death that says pay this, and you think, oh, I can bypass this, I can put in my recover disk, you know, through a USB and reboot, and it'll boot to that. But you forget that these ransomwares have changed your BIOS, so it doesn't allow you to reboot from a USB, which might be how it was as a default setting. And so it's working, right? It's locked you out. That's the whole thing. Or it can be that crypto ransomware where it's actually encrypting your laptop. It can, and again, it's doing that. It's wrapping the encryption around your systems, your data, and then of course that's the whole point. It's got the it has the private key to unlock that, and that's what you're paying for to get. So ransomware as a technology is pretty quick and easy. It's not labor intensive, as you can imagine. These bad actors just query these bots, and then they throw them out there. They go fishing, literally waiting for somebody to click on it, and then it will do what it needs to do. Now, that's the other interesting thing about ransomware, is that it's not necessarily current. You can find some ransomware, and when you start to investigate, like in some log files to see what was downloaded or what the scan was, you get a signature about the ransomware, and you'll be like, wow, this is like 4 years old. We already know the key to this, so we don't actually have to pay. We can actually decrypt already. And I've been on some clients' incident response where we started to look at what kind of ransomware was applied, and that was the case. And it's because it just sits out there. It's very stale. And bad actors are not very diligent about updating their own you know, scripts and things. And so if it doesn't work, they don't care. That it doesn't affect any of their time, effort in there. It's and ransomware is pretty random. It's not. Sometimes it can be targeting based on politics or something, but it's pretty rare. It's really just, again, it's just waiting for somebody to come and click, and then they just again go fishing. They hope to get some money instead of no money. So now we're going to spend most of our time together to really walk through how to prevent ransomware from actually snaring you, and some recovery capabilities should you actually happen to get hit by ransomware, and then really walk through what cyber insurance is all about and how that can be a partner in your ransomware, or even if you think about it, any kind of incident response activity. So when we really look at preventive capability, as you can imagine, you know, 99.9% of our activity is online, and we have web-based browsers. It's not like you have in the office network anymore, and we really see the usability of that with our COVID work from home model, where we can work from home and still get access into information because all of that is occurring through an internet connection on a web browser process. And the important thing when you look at your, either if it's just your legal firm and if you're a local firm or a national firm, as well as for your clients, is really to ask the question about how your network architecture and topology is set up. And so the key to making sure you divide or segment that network is that if a ransomware script is downloaded and it only has to go to one network backbone, job done, one and done, click, done, encrypted, and everything you have, all the keys to your kingdom, are encrypted in a very simple move. But when you break that up and segment your network, and you can look at critical pathways or business functions to segment your network, it really takes more work effort for that scan on your network by the ransomware to go, and you can probably detect that behavior before you get encrypted. So it's kind of a smart way to kind of divide up the workflow and the traffic on your network. And as you can imagine, one of the segments on your network are your backup systems. A lot of our data and our file servers and, of course, our databases are being backed up or written to another device, sometimes called a storage area network or a network access file storage. And so those are typically online. And when we say online, we mean on the network, rather than being written to like a tape or media, which was pretty much the model about 20 years ago. So now that everything is really online and it's on the same network, what we really recommend is to break up that network segment so that it's really traceable to find somebody that's crawling your network and maybe planting or writing things there. Those are signatures that you can kind of pick up. And so that's really important to realize how you want to break that up. Now, another really good preventive thing is really looking at some devices and filters that are kind of appliances that sit in front of your email server. Now, why is that so smart? As you can imagine, email is probably the #1 way of quick response, because if it comes into the email, people trust that it's from a valid sender, and a lot of times the content in that email is relevant. So you're really opening it, click open the email, and then read it, and then it says, you know, click here. So email is kind of, you know, one of those hot spots. So you really want to add in some more layers to reduce the likelihood of being clicked there. So one of that is like, it kind of puts it in a sandbox. So every message going into your organization or leaving your organization is filtered through these tools. And what they can do is they can see if the click reference is to a malicious IP, because a lot of these bad actors' websites are actually detected, and then those good Samaritans report that up to a lot of these network monitoring tools. And so it's easy to detect a bad actor's website. So we have what we call blacklisted IPs, and that's the whole point. We blacklist them because we know that they're not safe to go click on. And so this software can actually filter your email links and see if that's a bad link. It can also give you a high probability. It may not know that it's a bad reference, but it could say, you know what? This isn't passing our sniff test. We don't recommend that you click in this email. And another one is it can actually look inside the document. So if you think about it, if it's got an attachment, if you downloaded the attachment or even open the attachment in the email, that click response can actually execute because it has to save a write locally, even to your cache memory to view it. And that mini write is enough for those scripts to actually get off and running. And they can self-propagate. That's the other kind of hard part about some of these bots. You know, you could be like, oops, that doesn't seem right, but it's too late. It is off and running. And so this email software, like a Mimecast or a Proofpoint, that's really what it's designed to do. And it just helps reduce the likelihood of receiving messages that are malicious. But there's another reason that this is really useful. Is that when you, let's just say the bad actor's on your website and it wants to send that payload back home. So it wants to encrypt the database and send it home. And so it can do that through a port as well as through creating an email and sending it back to itself. And so some of these devices can actually look at what ports are open and how data is transmitted across your network. Another good opportunity here is to what we call microsegment your network. And so that's using some virtualization software like VMware. And they also have additional controls in how it's segmenting your network. And it just creates these unique credentialed microsegments that just reduce the likelihood of a bot just cracking that and moving forward. And so there's a good, if you start to look at this, right, you're really just breaking up the likelihood of just having a random script discover everything and encrypt it or lock it out. The other nice part about segmenting your network or even micro-segmenting your network is that you actually can reduce the likelihood of, let's say you've got some type of business that's just really vulnerable. Sales is a good example because they kind of want to respond to every message received and they really don't want to reduce they don't want to filter it out because they don't know. And so you could put them on a micro segment and actually just block them, and their email has a very separate, if you will, sandbox. So it kind of keeps it safe and you don't allow for their end clients to, you know, move stuff around. You kind of lock down their end clients. So that just gives a really good example of how you can kind of reduce the exposure to your whole organization just by breaking up the segments in your network. Another really good preventive capability is training your employees on where to save data. Now, if you go back to this pressure cooker time clock ticking, and you have a strategy that says, you know what, we don't worry about losing data on our employees' laptops, those end clients, because by default, we'll just wipe it out. And then if all of your employees know that, they're not going to trust that if they save it locally, it's going to be there when they need it. They're likely to save it into a secured location that's save it locally because they're roaming around, and they don't want to lose that information. They don't want to go online. They don't want to do the VPN into the data repository. And so they find it get efficient. They're just going to save it locally. And then they forget to move it to the appropriate location when they're back in the office or when it's convenient, if you will, to VPN and upload information. And I've worked with a lot of attorneys and with this COVID, actually, a lot of law firms have gotten bit with some ransomware and other kinds of security breaches. And this was one of the really hard realities that they faced, which was like, wow, I was told to save it to an online stored and backed up location, and I just didn't do it. And that's the hard part that you realize is that even with ransomware, recovering it, even if you pay for the key to unlock, there's no guarantees that your data is still intact, that you don't actually have to try to revalidate your data to see if there was any unauthorized modification to it. So it can compromise the integrity of the data even if you decrypt, and you know, everybody wants to assume that everything's normal, but you still have to revalidate it, and that can be rather challenging. So don't always trust that that's there, but help your employees to know about what the consequences are if you don't actually think about saving it to a stored online security and, of course, backed up location. So another preventive area here from a control standpoint is it's kind of detective and preventive here, and this is really those network controls. Now, even if you've segmented and micro-segmented, there should be some monitoring on that network for all of the right reasons. Bad actors are knocking on the door all the time, and having those controls in there help support your organization to have a heads up. And there are some emerging technologies now. There's some software out there. It's called network behavioral analysis software, and it complements all of the other kind of monitoring controls that we have out there. So one of our monitoring controls is called a security information and event management software or monitoring software, and that's called a SIM. And what that does is it looks at your activity and the log activity of that, like your firewall. It's logging all the time, who's knocking on the door, ingress and egress. And so it can really get information out of the behavior of the packets of information that are crossing your network and what it's doing in tracking whether that network activity is legitimate or not legitimate. And what also is fascinating about this is that this ransomware detection software, because of the behavior of ransomware, right, it's designed to go crawl your network. And that's kind of abnormal behavior. If you're rolling out patches to all of your desktop and laptops, right, there's usually a schedule and it's predictable and it's a blast. But if you're just kind of randomly crawling your network, that's kind of abnormal, as well as the timing of it. And then, of course, if it starts and writes or runs a query, that's also can be incredibly abnormal behavior. So this network behavior analysis has this feature where it can start to actually look at traffic on your network. It also complements some of that monitoring processes, because with the ransomware detection, it doesn't have to decrypt the message to inspect it. Think about that email one, right? It has to, if the email is encrypted, it has to put it in a sandbox. It has to decrypt it, inspect it, recrypt it, and send it on its way, or hold it in quarantine and let you decide if it's something that you want to bring in. And some of these monitoring controls have to just look at the traffic. It may not be able to inspect encrypted traffic. It can't. It can only assume to a probability of it. So you might miss packets that look legitimate, but because it's encrypted, you can't validate it. So this network behavior analysis is pretty ingenious, where it doesn't have to expose your organization by decrypting, exposing, and then recrypting. And so that's kind of an emerging technology now that really kind of helps you. I call it the canary in the coal mine. It gives you the heads up. You know what? This is just suspicious enough. Let's just inspect it a little bit more, or just block it all together. Legitimate traffic will be requested, right? If you're waiting for a message and it doesn't come, better that than being masqueraded as legitimate and turn out to not be legitimate. So now we get into another kind of preventive control, but it's really a recovery capability. And the heart of this one is, if you haven't sat down as an organization and really thought through how you're going to address a business disruption, now's the time to do it. It's never too late to do that. And if we think about it, you can put in scenarios like ransomware and really ask yourself as a team, it's not always an IT problem. Look at this. We've got dependencies on the employees and where they host data and where they store data. So they're part of this question. So you should really have a strategy and go back to that psychology. Do I pay? Don't I pay? Can I afford to pay? Can I not afford to pay? Because those questions drive the behaviors, literally the behaviors of your entire organization. So if you say, you know what, our strategy is we're not going to pay. Now you can imagine if you say don't pay, you're going to look at, you know what, the way we don't pay and get in business fast is we wipe all the systems, we unplug all the systems, we take them off the network, we wipe infected systems, and then we re-image, and then boom, off we go. So it helps everybody know that's exactly what we're going to do. You got one ransomware, boom, off you go. It's really simple, right? There aren't questions in psychology about it. You know exactly how to work. But you also, regardless of paying or not paying, you have to document. You have a security breach. And so you have to document that breach, the decisions around the actions, and that should be part of your business continuity plan so that people understand what stakeholders have to be involved, what decisions have to be made, and how you evidence those. And then, of course, notifying affected stakeholders, whether that's employees, key clients, you might have regulatory oversight partnerships that you have to really work with together, as well as your cyber insurance if it comes into play for getting reimbursed, maybe for part of that security breach. Even if you're not going to pay the ransom, you might invoke your cybersecurity insurance, and we'll talk about that next. But these are some of the complexities that happen with ransomware specifically, because as a business continuity, you're quickly in disaster recovery if after 10 days you're still not up and running, you haven't gotten your network cleaned, you're trying to find out forensics and other stuff from that as well. So that's the challenge with all of these strategies. And of course, it's really important to figure out in advance what you're going to do, and that can help you recover quickly, but it also can drive some of your strategy, like in your network segmentation, your backup strategy, and of course how to respond and training employees in that regard. A really good preventive strategy is your backup systems, because you can also, it's a part of your recovery capability as well. But if you segment the network, you have less likelihood of your backups also being encrypted or locked out. And of course, if you don't have access to your backup systems, you're really dead in the water, right? So it helps drive that continuity strategy, and of course, how you're going to design your network to really break that up so that you're not hugely impacted or negatively impacted by not being able to get to backup. Data is actually probably more important than their system configurations, because those are easily, defined or received rather than the actual data. And then distinct credentials for the backup system network. That's a bit more technical term for your IT team, but it's really letting you realize that wherever you place your backup file system and the processes and what network segments that's on, take it off the central channel, but then have very distinct credentials for those backup system network. Just because ransomware is really designed to redo your BIOS, redo the admin passwords, it's designed to do that. So if it's on the same network, it's usually the same administrators on that network and probably the same password for that administration, not uncommon. So once it's done one, it's actually got the keys to your kingdom across the board. So when you have distinct and separate credentials for your backup segment, harder work effort for the ransomware bot, and it's less likely. And again, it's that canary in the coal mine. You're hoping to monitor it and take things off the network before it's contaminated. And so that would be probably your business continuity response is, you know what, we take our backup network segment offline immediately. We don't want anything crawling the network, or you just want to reduce the likelihood of getting nabbed. And then, of course, think about your whole employees and your key stakeholders by each business function getting involved in testing your recovery capability, even if it's a desktop. It's not a bad exercise, particularly if you have some, employees that just don't want to play by the rules. Have them participate and say, look, our scenario today is ransomware. Your computer is completely locked, and it's going to be 4 days before we can get into it. What's the impact to you? What's the impact to your business? What's the impact to your clients? If this were to occur at a certain time of month, of quarter, period of time in the year, are there different kinds of impacts? And if you think about what kind of consequences could be, there could be fines, and of course, get other activities out of, just the consequence of not being access to your data. And then the other thing that helps when they're involved in this is, it helps them make sure that the strategy for storing data online, is that effective? Is there a reason that they're storing it locally? Here's another one. Some attorneys like to email their work to their personal email. So it's going outside the corporate security zone into their own personal zone. And even though you might say don't do that, they might do that. And what you realize is that that also is exposing them on their personal side. So the personal and professional controls are now blurred, and they can receive an infection from the personal side because they're moving data back and forth. And so this kind of walking them through the scenarios and the impacts can help them realize that that is actually unsafe behavior for them personally, but clearly professionally. Imagine having to do the root cause and discovering it's from an attorney who clicked response locally and wasn't going to save his data or their data on the shared, secured, and backed up network. So there's a huge impact to ransomware, obviously, but bringing all of those stakeholders into the continuity and the testing of that helps refine the plan, make sure it's reasonable, but also drives home that message. Look, our strategy is to wipe everything off your laptop. So, we don't know when we would get bit, but we do know that we would wipe it immediately. We're not going to ask you, can we? Everybody's locked out. We have to, right? So it becomes a real impact for that. So ransomware for the insurance company, so cybersecurity coverage is a really emerging industry. It took a while for this to actually become comfortable with insurance companies, because one of their challenges is how to evidence that the cybersecurity attack was either internally driven or externally driven, like accountability. And then they have a lot of criteria over like the payment out amount. So like ransomware, some don't cover paying the ransom. They might cover your losses, but not paying the ransom. Others have limits on what they would pay in terms of ransom. And this gets back to, can we pay and can we afford to pay? And then when you get to the afford to pay part, you got to remember that insurance is a reimbursement model. So you have to prove your case, and then it gets approved, and then you get refunded. It's not going to forward you the money to pay the ransom. And so it's important to recognize that when you look at using insurance or covering insurance coverage. The losses that you get, imagine it's just depending on where that ransomware bit, or if it bit your whole network. Again, if you're on a single network, it's likelihood that it stopped everybody in the water. But those losses are everybody sitting around until that problem is solved. And that could be a week. And like I said, on average, it's about 10 days. And there are tons of stories about the impact to business because you're offline or sporadically getting back online over 10 days. And then, of course, you're now not a trusted partner. People are now very leery about your internal security and how that works. So those losses add up, and it's not a quick fix. I think that's the other hard part about ransomware. It's not a patch and then reboot. It's going to take some time to figure that out. And that leads into these other costs. And some of these costs are hiring experts to negotiate with hackers, which again, it's a new legal space here where legal firms are kind of in the business of incident response management. And you might be reaching out to them because you want their advice on how to handle not only the insurance side of it and all that criteria, making sure you collect everything that you need to, but they also probably have a big Rolodex of good experts to connect to for negotiation, for recovery of your systems, or even how to manage the rest of your incident. And one piece that cybersecurity insurance is starting to stick to is that they want you to remediate your systems. That's another cost. How to remediate your system, whether that's putting in additional layers of defense or, looking at some of that network monitoring software, or just remediating how your employees can click response. So you might have to change how your laptops are locked down or browsers and blacklisting things. But it becomes a scenario here. And part of the reason that ransomware and cybersecurity coverage are really difficult to get reimbursed for is because most of the time ransomware is pretty preventable, right? With some, segmenting your network, having some monitoring on there, and of course email filters. Those layers of defense are pretty successful at blocking a lot of it. But if you're just bound and determined to click on things, you're most likely going to get nabbed at some point. And so cybersecurity coverage can have all these little, in the fine print about what doesn't qualify for reimbursement. So you get a percentage back, but maybe not all that you wanted. So that can be really tricky. Now, the legal expert management of the incident is looking at, and this is by no means a complete list, but it's just to really connect you to all of the activity, whether it's your insurance company asking you for this, or internally, you just need to know the answer to these questions. But you got to do some forensics. You got to determine what laptop or user clicked response and initiated the propagation. How did this get into your network? And then, of course, system restoration. You have to figure out how you're going to take systems offline and then review and see if you can clear out the script because it's running. It doesn't stop just because you're there. Even if you pay the ransom, you have to clear out your systems. You have to clean this up. Now, it's an interesting part of ransomware where they like to come back. Once you've paid the ransom, they like to come back and then see if you fix your security holes. And the second time you get by ransomware, it can be literally $1 million, and they get outrageous because the first one was like, you know, it's like the ethical hacking thing, like they ethically ransomed you, and it's like €1,000 or whatever, and then they're like, but you didn't fix it, so now we're going to really make you pay. And that happens more often than you would think. And that's the really insidious part about ransomware, is that once you've engaged with the bad actors, they really got your number. And I've worked on several incidents where they didn't call us on the first incident, they called us on the second one because they said, we really now can't pay this. It's prohibitive. And our cyber and security insurance says it's our fault because we didn't fix it, so they're not going to pay. And that's when you end up in that moment of, can I afford to pay? And maybe I'm a going concern if I do, or you're out of business even if you don't, because now you're really offline and you've had 2 security breaches. And that really becomes, as you can imagine, a very difficult process to walk through. And I'm just going to wrap up now so we have some time for questions. And then just this last statistic here is that ransomware is really growing, and it's doubling year over year. And 2019, the average cost of ransomware is about $84,000, and that's 104% from 2018. Now, that's not the ransomware amount. The ransomware amount might have been $1,000. But this is showing you the cost to remediate, to get all the stakeholders there, the time that it took, the losses. So it really can bite you fast and really hiccup you. So I'm not going to go through the summary slide. I'm actually going to get to some of these questions because I think there's some really good questions here. And then I'm going to answer some that I see in the chat, and then I'll let Andrew see if there's any other questions. So the first one here is, after payment, what prevents a second ransomware takeover? So you're absolutely right. There is no guarantee that once you make a payment, you're not going to be, you're like, you know, get out of jail free card. In fact, as I just described, they often come back and test your security again. And then if they can ransom you again, they really soak you for it. So there are actually no guarantees. There's about a 40% chance that the private key that they give you will actually decrypt the files if you do pay. But I have to say, I've been in a couple of these sessions with the bad actors, and if their private key doesn't decrypt you, they actually do come in, they remote in, and they troubleshoot it, and they get you back up and running. So, hey, you know, they're a little bit of customer service. Nothing bad with that. And so is Barracuda one of these filters? I'm going to assume that's part of those email things. And your firewalls can help do some filtering, but if you're talking about an email appliance that's actually going to inspect email packets, I'm not familiar with Barracuda getting to that level of detail. It can do a lot of filtering, and it's definitely a good control to put in place, but it's not the full solution when you think about email management. And then what is a sandbox? So that's a really good one. So sandbox is really, if you think of the back of the days in your network, you would have 2 firewalls, and in the middle of that firewall zone was called a DMZ. And so it's really just placing a server that is not physically or logically connected to your network, and so you can post things to the server. It's like a write once moment, and so that becomes what we call a sandbox, so that if you open up bad stuff in it, it can blow it up. You don't worry about it. There's no connection. It can't propagate your network. It's kind of one of those old honeypot ideas. So that's why these appliances for your email will open it up in a zone that actually isn't connected to your network, so that it can actually go through and affect the network, which is why those are so good for your email appliances. And then you're right. So another question is, if you choose to pay, what is the likelihood that the bad actor simply demands more money? So since it's set up with Bitcoin, it's sort of a request acknowledge component on the blockchain network. So believe it or not, you know, it's a one transaction thing. It's not like you can go in and say, because of the way it's set up on the Bitcoin, it's just that amount. So you're just paying that amount. Now they can come back if you haven't plugged your security. They can come back and do a different ransom for a different amount. And another question is, are there any governmental agency that should be informed of an attack by ransomware? So InfraGard is the FBI's private citizen coordination division, and so definitely report any cybersecurity breach to the FBI. They typically only take it as data and information if it's a material amount, or if it looks like it's some sort of like target, you know, kind of an attack, then they sort of come in and help you with it. But typically it's informational because they're just trying to track reporting and data on that. Depending on your industry, like healthcare, they have the Office of Civil Rights. You have to report up to them if you have any kind of breach of patient information. And you might have other regulatory oversight groups based on what kind of information is there that would like to know whether or not there was an impact to do that. So here's another good question, which is, of all the tools that are available to combat the ransomware issue, what single thing could a person or a company do to prevent an attack? And I don't know that there's one thing to do. I think what we've walked through is have a plan. Don't have your backup on your local laptop, right? So make it on a separate thing. Have a separate drive or some other location where backups are stored, because if they're connected, it's also discoverable. So think of it in terms of that. Think about software, how you're monitoring your network. So lock down all of those ports and places that people can go browse. So that's where that network monitoring using what's called a security operations center or a managed security service provider. That's what BrainTrace does. And think about that software that can help you with it. Now, that network behavior analysis software, that's really cutting edge. And there's one out there called Dragonfly, and what it does is it looks at the sort of that traffic on your network. It's the canary in the coal mine, and it can look at the patterns without decrypting the data. But a lot of your MSSP providers have really smart software that can look at the behavior of your information, but most of them, you know, have to kind of decrypt to get real good information. So it's better than nothing, but it's nothing else to do with that. So, you know, there's something else in that with that. So Andrew, those are all the questions that came to me privately. I'll let you see if there's any other questions on your side.
Yeah, sure. So Valerie sent us a question. When someone is working remotely on a laptop that contains both personal and work data, what should the worker do to protect the personal data, since it's not been backed up to business network?
That's a great question. First, I would get an external hard drive. They're usually USB connected, and move your personal off to that that personal hard drive. Is called an external drive. It doesn't have to be like a device. It could be a USB. Sometimes they're now like terabytes big. But move your data, move your personal data off your, co-professional and private laptop, and at least make sure that your personal data is off. And get in a habit. If you did something significant, like photographs, right? You don't want to lose the photographs. Even save them to that external drive. You don't always have to save everything local. Another area here is that we've got a lot of shared databases online, like G Drive or Box. And so you can save stuff to, again, it's not on your local, but it's on a shared repository like Box or Google Drive, and you can secure that as well. So you don't just, make sure you're not sharing stuff and making it public. But for your professional, even on your laptop, work with your IT department to really segregate. You can actually do your virtual segmentation on your laptop as well. You can even download VMware for that. And so you can actually create a network segment on your local computer and lock that down so that even if you had somebody else in your home, they can only log on. They have to choose if it's the home side of your drive of your computer or the professional, and they have separate passwords and security in it. So you can actually start to segment from a physical standpoint and a logical standpoint on one device. And just realize that if you've got personal information that's really precious, think about storing it in areas that are not actually connected to a network that can be there.
Okay, next question. What software or companies do network behavioral analysis?
Well, like I said before, BrainTrace is an example of network behavioral analysis software. You could ask that of your MSSP provider, or you could look up any of those organizations that are doing network monitoring activities. Sort of Gartner has done what's called a SOAR technology, is search organization and response management, for looking at network traffic and analytics on it. So there's not one, but the one that I'm most familiar with is what Braintrace has developed to look at it, because it has that ransomware, early ransomware detection capability, where it doesn't have to worry about if the packet is encrypted or not. Because again, that analytics, there's a behavior in how the packet and the payload, like where is it going, what doors are it knocking on, is it just email? And again, you've got that other kind of interaction when you're monitoring your network, where users are going online, right? 99% of our activities are online. So now you've got, browser behaviors. So you go to a website, you have a way to see, oh, there's a click response, and now they can follow, that monitoring software can follow that activity to that user, and then it's like, oh, it's not going to their IP address, it's going all over the place. So it has a chance, if you have monitoring network services, you have a chance to actually block and tackle and really just start to isolate traffic that starts to look insidious or malicious. And you just reduce the likelihood of getting bit. Hey, if it's legitimate, these are like milliseconds that this stuff happens in. So if it's legitimate traffic, we can release it, right? At worst, you've just got, somebody that's annoyed that like, gee, the network's really slow, but it's slow for the right reasons.
Okay, the last question I have, so if anybody has other questions, send them in now. Can cloud applications be infected with ransomware?
Oh, wonderful question. I didn't even touch on that, but that's a really good question. Yes, I think we assume that because the cloud, we think of that as not being our network, but again, 99.9% of our activities are web-based, and that web-based backbone is probably cloud-driven. So even if you're a hybrid network where you have like a data center, but you also have some cloud services, like I said, you might have your SharePoint or ShareFile on a web browser, and that web browser is managed or hosted by like Amazon for Azure or Amazon for AWS or Microsoft for Azure. So we probably have some sort of hosted application as well. Or some organizations, law firms, like to use like Google Suite, right? So that's the software that's shared and hosted, so it's cloud-based. So how that works is that ransomware, again, you have clients, so you have data on your local laptop that is syncing up to those cloud services, right? That's even if you think about it on your web browser, you're opening it up, so it's going to come in. And so if your ransomware is following your IP pointer, it knows where it's going. That IP is the share, right? That IP is that cloud hosted service. So it's following it in, if you will, through the back door. And we like to think that the credentials on your front door would stop that, but you forget that all of this syncing of data is not getting credentials. You're pre-authorized. You have a client on your laptop, and that's just how it works. So it can encrypt it from on your local and wait for the sync, and then encrypt it on the sync. So it can do a lot. We also have the Internet of Things, which is also very cloud-based, and that's where your mobile device can become part of the ransomware. So again, it's just looking for those pointers and where that is hosted, and then it just nabs it from there. So I have
That's all questions I have on my end. Go ahead.
Okay, I have two more questions. One is, can I get a copy of the PowerPoint? And I will share that with Lydia. I could assume there's no problem in sharing that with you. And then the last question here, and we'll wrap up, is if business sets up separate logins on business laptops so that there is a business login for business and then a login for personal, and if an employee gets ransomware on the personal login, will it also infect the business login? So that's a really good question, right? Because it's one device, and if you think about it, you've logically segregated those two devices. So can ransomware cross-pollinate over into the other device? And here's how that works, is that the first thing ransomware is going to do is go to the BIOS of your device's system. So you have two drives, it doesn't care. It's going to get to the BIOS, whether it nabs you through the professional or the private, and then it's going to lock your laptop out. Job done. And if you think about it, if it's just your laptop, it's not going out to the network, it's not propagating anything, it just got you, and by happenstance got your professional captured as well. And so so that's the challenge with that, is that ransomware on a single device, you're done, one and done. It doesn't matter what side of that, it's going for your BIOS system. Okay, so with that, I'm going to wrap up and say thank you all for your time and attention. I love your questions, and we'll get that